Alors, bonjour tout le monde.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Louis Tremblay, Quebec City. Today, we're here to tell you a small story, the story of BIM for the client. You see, in the BIM, in the title, there is not the word BIM because our approach led us to integrate business practices and integrate our processes. A few figures from the city. As you can see, we have a sandbox, very nice sandbox. It's a nice size to put in place such an approach as BIM for organization. So we have some 1,100 buildings for 1 billion assets. What initiate us to BIM is the amphitheater with the people from Pomerleau. So they proposed to us a BIM construction. There were delivery issues with a lot of complexity. Delivery also was very complex. So the city decided to go forward with BIM construction. During all of this, we realized that why not modify our model and to add a seventh dimension? No, not still. We wanted to generate information, and we will come to that later.
Un an plus tard,
A year later, the direction of building management said, well, we had nice advantages with this amphitheater, but for the next major project, which is Centre de l'As, why not using BIM? Interesting. We said, oh, no, we won't do the same thing as for the amphitheater. As you see here, the blue part is in BIM. So we thought, well, let's do the whole thing, life cycle. So we said, yes, as long as it works. So I started with this. Now I thought, well, we need help. It's very nice. We have a project. September 2016, January tender. So we thought we have to have the management plan BIM. We have to develop strategies, and we wanted to take on the responsibility for all this. For the city, it was very important to play an important role in all this and not tell the professionals to say, we want BIM and do BIM, and we will take your model at the end. We wanted to get involved. 2 pilot projects as well. I have to drink water, I'm sorry. At the same time, we identified 2 projects, Saint-Roch and Bardi. So we thought, why not doing it in BIM? The project leader came with this idea, but we were not ready because we were writing up the BIM management plan. So we decided to have a tender process without taking the BIM management. Now they are in construction. It's working very well, and we have great feedback. Now, why would a client accept BIM or approve BIM? What is important is the level of coordination of plans and specs that are very often deficient. In fact, many projects, many bids are not acceptable because there are a lot of gaps. So this is a context we were working in. We had been working in for many years, and a lot of money is used not necessarily for the user. Historically, I would say that we have about 10% extra for new buildings and 15% for existing buildings and 20% for the rest. If you had contingencies, it's normal contingencies, will tell me, but oftentimes this money is used to correct mistakes. And what was related to the lack of coordination, for example. So it means a lot of money that is going down the drain and is not for the end user. Now, the important issues for the operating of the building. So the project is completed. The gang of the project leaves, and people in operations arrive. So they are there for 6 months, 2 years, and exploitation people, in fact, do not have all the information. So they want to get the information, but the information is very difficult to access. You have TQC, TQA. So we do not really have access to reality. What was built? What are the deliverables? All this is part of the problems. So with BIM, what do we want? We want to improve quality, the quality for a professional deliverables, quality of execution on site, and reduce the conflicts between disciplines on site, reduce the demands for changes. And you know this environment, but this was really our objective. Access to information, really to have a better information base for eventually transferring to exploitation. Optimize our management practices for maintenance. And the famous digital shift, no choice, we're in it. Well, let's take advantage of it because we have it with the amphitheater. Also, rapid feedback for our project. For us, it takes 24 months. We have feedback in 24 months, and we can learn a lot from this feedback. So let's not forget that the client has a responsibility. He dictates the market. He has to make the demands to force the people from the industry to take this digital shift. Obviously, these actors have no choice. It's a nice little term I learned recently. It's interesting. Competition. It's a mix of competition and cooperation. No choice of going there if you want to perform well. Last sentence, I put it for our general auditor. It's for better management of public funds, and it's true. So we launched mandates. We started with a pilot project.
Long terme, il faut se structurer.
And we have to get structured, to get organized, and we had mandates. We needed accompaniment for a period of 24 months, approximately, divided in two parts. One part is a little, well, I'm summarizing, so construction and then exploitation. For the design construction, what we call is implementation of BIM, and there was a tender for that. And as far as asset management related to BIM, it's Planifica that won it, that was awarded it. So we're in a context of competition. These people are in the industry, and oftentimes these people will be enemies, in brackets, but people are ready to collaborate to have the industry advance. And as I said at the very beginning of my presentation, do you have anything to add?
Ah, mais c'était pas ça au début, là. Non, faire sa part depuis le début.
No, since the beginning, in fact, I can say that we have a very good working team. So as you see the interrelation between both mandates. So in fact, for interviews, we do share the approach. We all agree on the approach. So I will now give the floor to my colleague because really I went way beyond my time. So I will give the floor now to my colleague, Mr. Guillemette. Good afternoon, everyone. So today, very briefly, I will show you something that's very transparent. I will tell you where we are in terms of advancements, how we structured the mandate to get to this deployment of BIM in the city of Quebec. First of all, I won't belabor the point, but you know that when we talk about BIM, we talk about three fields: the processes, governance, and technology. It's extremely important to think about these three components. When we want to innovate, for example, it's important to have the framework that will allow us to innovate. Governance is important. When you want to innovate, it's important to know whether it's a real innovation. Do we improve something? Because if innovate doesn't lead you anywhere, it's not worth it. So we will have to deal with processes if we want to innovate, and also the tools, technology. I will come back to this. These are the three fields that we're going to talk about. How do we structure them? We have three components: a strategic one, implementation, and main BIM management. It's 3.5 because we're in a context where the projects evolve very quickly. So for implementation, we already had targeted interventions that had to be made. For planning the efforts, so at the beginning of the mandate, this is how we perceived it. For strategic planning, we had 6-month work on this, and then we progressively deployed the whole thing because we see the effort for the BIM effort is important. And what's very good is that that's where we are today. So in fact, we had good forecasts. Now, if we go to the heart of the strategic component, one of the first work that was done was the identification of the stakeholders. which is not easy to do in an organization such as the city because a lot of people are involved. So you have general management, general direction, and we focused on the building management. We have to know the relevant players, all of the stakeholders. Well, that it was a very big task. Obviously, we recommended the setting up of a steering committee and a strategic component implementation plan that will include the vision and the objectives of the whole of the life cycle for the city of Quebec. We also had a maturity and process study. It's extremely important if you want to improve something, you have to know what's going on really in the organization. So these are work documents. It's different from the documents that will then given to the participants of the project. So these documents will allow us to analyze the situation. You see here the various processes, and then we will be able to set maturity targets. This is underway, and we have also another plan, matrix of responsibility for the transition, communication plan, and so the part, well, what you see, you saw all the components that were addressed with the strategic component for implementation. This is a cell you see here. This is our team. And we also involved other responsibles. We're talking about the competition and cooperation. We involved responsible from departments. We'll say each team had a champion to allow us to go and get the important information from each team. So all this had to be set up. We review all the BIM structure, so you see that there are a lot of documents, but it's not a package that everybody has to read at all times. It's because each stakeholder has to see what is relevant for him. So we are now trying to make sure that all our documents be more prescriptive than descriptive to make them a little lighter and more fluid. So this is the standard quality of our documents. Communication and coordination. What you see here is a strategy of the evolution of information within the models. A lot of planning elements that will feed the model and help us for the exploitation and maintenance components. We'll come back to that later. Here, documents that allow us to make a difference between the deliverable part from the other part, the exploitation part, reflection on the procedure of digitization of the existing housing stock, performance indicators, training plans for the staff. We addressed also the technological infrastructure. Here you have the schedule, the involvement of stakeholders. A lot of work was done to inform all the stakeholders, people dealing with the building management. We had information sessions to explain them the context, what BIM was all about, why we needed their help, and all that. We tried to be inclusive in our approach. And obviously, we met other partners, such as ETI. We also reviewed all of the deliverables. So we did not do that. We work with the people from the city to review all this, to see what deliverables are required, those who could be replaced by others. So you add or replace some deliverables. And finally, we will propose an evaluation matrix and have some proposals. If all the actors around the table are all well advanced in BIM, no problem. The door will be open for improvement and innovation. But as work givers, we have to make sure that at the end of the day, we get the product we wanted. Now, practical guide. Once again, you see the fields that have been addressed in this section. And finally, there is the main BIM management. So you know what that means for such projects, to supervise the BIM projects, make sure that all the stakeholders are well informed, make sure that the directives are complied with, and there's quality control. So, in fact, this deals with all things linked to BIM, but it's something that's temporary because in parallel, we have a BIM team that's accompanied for the transition. The idea in the end is to automate the BIM projects for the city. And I will now give the floor to my colleague.
Donc, un des objectifs, comme Louis a mentionné,
One of the objectives, as we said at the beginning, is to do the transition from information to the exploitation teams. What we call the Trojan horse of the BIM system. So we would like to have an influence on all of the managers for asset management. For those of you who knows asset management, there's an ISO standard that exists, and there are also a lot of sub-norms mentioned by Frank. These are standards for England. But globally speaking, what is said here is that it's the activities of an organization that generate value for its organization. It's quite simple, but as you can see in what you see on the screen is that BIM is also the nucleus, and there's asset management has to be global. The goal here is to eventually in asset management is to find an equilibrium between cost, risk, and performance. Generally speaking, costs are capped, they're maximized, and the performance is also well defined. So we still have to manage risks. So with BIM, we can better manage our risks. So the pyramid of information, here the focus is on information management. We have a model which gives us an incredible opportunity to integrate information. The objective here is to say, okay, we have data that become information, and eventually they become knowledge. So most of the people managing assets have a lot of knowledge, but they also sometimes have problems to translate that into data. So with the model, we have it gives us the opportunity to lift this data to the level of decision making, and then the other process starts. So now, what Frank presented to you, well, we're very focused for projects, and in parallel, we worked with other people who will receive this information that is included in the model. We have a very human approach. No complex things are there. We had a lot of workshops with most of the disciplines to realize that finally there's no common language, so there was no standardized nomenclature. So some professionals call things on one thing, and engineers at the city call them another thing, and people on the side, in fact, had another language. So developing a common language was a very, very important exercise to make sure that the information that can be found in the model will be the same information that will be transferred by the management tools. What we did is that for each and every one of the equipment, we agreed on a common language for the nomenclature and 4 letters with sequential figures. Quite simple, but still it took many meetings to make sure that everybody made compromises. Sometimes there were 4 letters, 2 letters, 3 letters. So we had to have codes that were easily that could easily be read. Then we had to know what information are necessary to generate the assets. This morning, for those of you who were there, you heard about the COBE standard, which is a data model that is used by Building Smart. It's been in use for a few years. So we had to disguise COBE because we tried to sit with the responsible of various disciplines to ask them what are the attributes or the features they needed. Once again, it's an exercise that looks quite futile, except that it allowed us to get the buy-in of the people leading with maintenance, people that had to buy BIM because they were the receptors of this. What do we need to know to manage this asset? That's very important. Once again, for each type of equipment, we had to check the standard attributes, and we asked them what were the essential attributes compared to those who were not required. So we had a list of those, and we will require from contractors and professionals to include or build in these features so that we get a complete model at the end that will be transferred to the management systems. As I said, once the data are transferred to our maintenance people, they're happy customers. Not only they will be happy with your attributes, but they will have been involved in the approach. It's very important to focus on the fact that for this project, there was a very important human aspect. We're not in an implementation process using a software saying, here are the data, goodbye, we're leaving. We involve people in the project so that the project be for long-lasting. So we're dealing with the life cycle of buildings and life cycle also of the project. So the better cycle for information is if we can have people understand that efforts are also assets and that they have to put some efforts to manage the whole thing. We have to manage the updating, and this can be archived if necessary. Obviously, lots of information we have between each of the phases, design, construction, and implementation. This involves cost, and we want to reduce the cost associated to loss of time. And we want to foster the commissioning or the operations of the building. So historically, there was always long delays in the city between all of these phases. So here, at the beginning, at the design phase, we use geometry to eventually focus more on the features, the attributes. So the data fields always in order to have a model that supports this information.
Monsieur Tremblay va reprendre la parole.
Mr. Tremblay now will take the floor.
Donc, tout ça, on parle souvent que
Oftentimes, we say that the main benefit of BIM is that who gets it? It's the owner of the housing stock. Essentially, where can this benefit be found? It's in exploitation. Presently, can it be measured? No, nobody has reached that goal. We're exploring right now. But the approach leads us to the seventh dimension. A small music here to do. What is BIM, in fact, for exploitation and maintenance? It's to feed asset management. We take the data to generate our tools. We feed our GMO data. We work with Triviga, and we will feed this information. In fact, SMB is not a use as such compared to 5D, 4D. We talk about information management transferred or translated information. We generate information, be it data, be it documents, geometry. It's only that. There's also the models and plans have to be updated, yes, but essentially we're dealing with information. What's at stake? Issues. The issues we're faced with is a knowledge of the processes for maintenance people. During the project, everything goes fine. Everybody uses PMI. Everything is documented. Everything goes well. But
une pompe qui brise.
maintenance people, well, a pump that is broken has to be repaired. The work is not documented. It's not mapped. So we have a problem in mapping the processes for maintenance people. We also talk about other processes that obliges the owner to map all of its building and all of its systems that we use. With the digital shift, it will help us for documenting all this. There's also the capacity to shift towards the digitization. It comes with documentation, the knowledge of software. Software is nice. We'll have Maximo Mobile software. The city people are really happy with this, but how will you be able to access information? How will it be updated? Who will be responsible for all these issues have to be reviewed and faced. When we build management, information management, it's very great BIM, 3D system, but for an owner, it's difficult. We have to be structured. We have to strike a balance between governance, processes, and technology. The balance of these fields will give us our full potential to exploit the data, to handle it, and finally to exploit the information that will be generated by the BIM model. At the beginning, we talked about BIM implementation. Well, we conduct interviews in various departments, and people said it's not your mandate to conduct interviews. You're dealing with construction projects. But for information, people associate BIM with 3D. So we brainstormed we found a good term, integration of business practices and transition to digitization. So a summary of our project at the city, we want a complete shift. We don't want to have teams working in various modes, one in BIM and another one with another system. We require from our professionals something that is, well, the maturity of professionals of the contractors. Maybe this won't be possible. Maybe we'll be limited. But by 2021, these projects will have been completed in BIM with a level of information that's BIM. So 116 building will be in BIM. So we will have to manage this type of information for exploitation and maintenance. We also think about the housing stock. We don't have we don't want to have two approaches. Sometimes people will have a BIM level of information, others a traditional type of information. So we will have to coordinate all this, analyze the opportunities, but we will have to mesh the two ways of doing, traditional and digital. We want to do this to the existing housing stock. So we will have to work with other services. We do that for building management, but other services will be impacted. Economic development, engineering, territory development. So I have no time, so I reach my conclusion. So in summary for us, what is BIM for the City of Quebec? It's clear it's an innovation vector. It leads us to go beyond what we used to do, to optimize, to improve. It's also an approach that fosters integration of business practices. Let's not delude ourselves. Organizations such as the city, we work in silos. Services work in silos. Department work in silo. Yes, there is cooperation and exchange, but BIM will help us to create, to build bridges between these silos, and we will know who needs information and when. It's an approach that focuses on organizational maturity. We talked about that previously. We conducted approximately 25 interviews. At the beginning, I thought it was a loss of time, but my friends convinced me that it was not a lot of time, but we had to have the skilled people and the buy-in of people to integrate all this. So we have to have coaching, training. People have to be informed. They have to know where we're going, what we're doing, and we have to know how we can help them to, in fact, go through this shift. Also, construction industry will become more performing. We cannot say that the construction industry stagnates, but it's falling behind. In fact, manufacturers are very advanced, and with global markets, if we don't want to lose or to fall behind too much, we have to get organized. And this goes through digitization and through BIM. Let's look at the if we don't want to be hit by the wave, we have to innovate. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Vas-y, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel. First of all, congratulations for this approach. I think that it's a very good Canadian model. Well, it's a good approach. First of all, the business process and see how we can integrate technology to all this. Very good. So a question comes to mind. It's fun when you have 3 or 4 project models, but when you have 1,500 of them, what is your strategy to update all of these models to keep them updated? Have you thought about this? Frank will tell me control of expectations. Do not give too much information. Wait until you understand the problem very well, and then you broadcast the information. Yes, it's an issue. It's part of our reflection. And I think that Frank will be better than me to answer this question. But how should I say it? We go step by step, rapid step, but they're small steps. So we're thinking about that right now. Frank, I don't know whether you would like to add on this. In fact, it's obvious that we had to address this. There are many types of possible update methods for models. First of all, for the update, we know that we often receive the models in bin form, but sometimes in other forms. We know that there are technological issues. We're trying to automate the model updating, and with the quality control, we will be able to update the models because we will have the information. And then it depends. What we will do, what are the strategy we're looking at, is that instead of feeding the model with information that will really burden it, in the end, the live information will be built in the software, and all the other tools will be there. But we will create links toward the model, which will help them to put in context all the information. So the information will be live at some point, and when the project will start, we will transfer the information. Now, if we have small projects internally, the updating of the model will be done internally. We have the drawing department. We were talking about controlling expectations. Well, please, this is confidential information here. So for small projects, it would be like that. For major projects, we will have the help of professionals. And if it is a global project, then we will really update the model.
Moi, j'ai une question concernant la stratégie.
I have a question concerning the strategy of connection to information linked to OB and the 1,200 items you collected with your staff. What is the technique used to ensure that the model will not be too heavy with the full of information? Well, as we said, we do not start with COBE. COBE is a standard, it's very interesting. But what is relevant is to know what are the fields that are really used. If we try to feed COBE and finally at the end of the chain nobody uses that, it's not interesting. Finally, the work is to identify the required parameters and at what phase. So the strategy will be a progressive one. In design, we need information. If we don't, progressively, we will feed the model in this way, and in the end, as I said, we will put the relevant information that will be usable at each phase. We can work with an export Excel and an import from another software. So we have various levels of information.
Pour avoir, oui, une redondance, mais qui est automatisée. Pas de redondance, l'information vit uniquement là où elle est.
So again, the advantage is to have 7 or 8 projects, and you can take advantage of all of the feedbacks each time. So every time you're trying to do something realistic, you can then live with something and improve it, because pretty much every 6 or 12 months there's a new project that's going to be delivered. So this will give us the opportunity to be improving while we're working practically with teams about how to use this.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce qu'il y avait d'autres questions?
Thanks. Any other questions? Excellent. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen.